Well, I like a challenge. Woo! Dee Brown, we're singing later tonight. You make me feel like a natural and incompetent woman. I have to tell you a couple things, and John Roach, wherever you are, since she went over a little, give me grace. Tonight when I came in, I asked Amy Green, I said, is your husband going to come here? Are you her husband right there? And she said, you will know him when he walks in. He is the hottest man in the place. But now that I've heard about the chocolate crunch, we may have to have a little contest later. You said it, Amy. I know. I did say to Trace, we couldn't have done this in a different order. Really? Really? Okay. So now, I am going to tell you that I am very honored to be able to present Ted Hodge as the 2018 Distinguished Service Award recipient. I have known Ted for as long as I've been in ACPE, and it's a long time. And when we were listening to Dee, I looked over at Ted, because I know a lot of stories about Ted that some of you don't know. And earlier we were talking about his mother, and Jan was telling me some things, and once we were hearing Dee Brown, Ted leaned over and he said, we might have to use Mama's stories. But I'm not going to, because there is enough to say. I don't have to read through Ted's accomplishments or resumes, because you've already gotten that. And I believe many of you know Ted, and you know the innumerable ways that he has contributed to this field of pastoral care and clinical pastoral education. And so instead, I want to talk to you about Ted Hodge, the Renaissance man. I will tell you that there are many here tonight who would never use the word Renaissance and Baptist in the same sentence. Maybe not even the same page. But I have a different view of Ted. When I moved to the East Central region in 1983 and first met Ted Hodge, I was skeptical. He was in leadership roles already and working hard, but I saw him as this quiet man who was a part of the Louisville cluster out of Southern Baptist Seminary, and I assumed he was a dull, conservative, and narrow-minded person. Needless to say, he helped me learn something about what assumptions and stereotypes can do. I did see that he was a leader, and a very strong leader in the East Central region, but in my early days there in the East Central region, I had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how any male leader in the East Central region could, as a leader, get in a word in edgewise around Dennis Kinney. Right, Amy? When I was regional director of the East Central region, I traveled to Louisville prior to the purge. I think I've said that correctly. And met with Ted and many others within the Louisville cluster. And I continued to see how wrong my assumptions were, not only about Ted, but many of the wonderful folks in the Louisville cluster. Ted was a leader in CPE, a more than capable administrator running a department of pastoral care and education in a large hospital system, and teaching as an instructor in the faculty at Southern Baptist. Now, the idea of a Renaissance man is that it's based on the belief that a person or a man's capacity for personal development is without limits, that there is competence in that person in a broad range of abilities and areas of knowledge, and that knowledge and learning should be in every man's grasp who is to be a Renaissance man. You have to exceed and excel in character, in your mind, your body, and spirit. Ted has done all of these things in his lifetime and continues to. Many of you may not know that he was an incredible, prolific runner in the Pappy Boysen Run. For many years, he won it. He does exceed at everything he does. He works hard, and the best thing about Ted, I'm always amazed at how much he always wants to learn more, no matter what. As I moved into working with leadership of ACPE at the national level, there was Ted. As president of ACPE, I made it very clear that budget and numbers was not my number one strength. And so I made sure that Ted was a part of my leadership team. I relied on him not just to understand the budget and the numbers, but to be proactive in the vision of ACPE, as we needed to make sure our strategic plan fit with our finances, and he did. Some of you don't remember those days, but let me tell you that many times I was so thankful that he was the one standing in front of the member meeting and fielding questions, comments, and on occasion, words of conflict about our financial picture. And he did it with clarity, strength, and patience. And as a Renaissance man, you do know, because I've said it, but those of you who know Ted, he loves to travel, he loves new experiences. He and his wife just returned from Cuba. And it wasn't just a travel leisure excursion, but it was a Rhodes Scholar travel experience where you learn about the culture you are visiting. That's Ted. And just so you know it, by the way, some years back, when I was making all my assumptions, I would have assumed that Ted avoided strong women. But if you have met his partner and wife, Dr. Jan Yusk, you know that's wrong. She's full of life and an adventuresome spirit, along with Ted. He has taught CPE in Hong Kong. He's been a significant participant in the International Pastoral Care and Counseling Congress in Ghana, India, Poland, and New Zealand. And he is going to continue to assist ACPE in developing and, in your words, D. Brown Daniels, expanding our international picture for CPE. The other phrase that describes Ted Hodge is a phrase that is often used as a cliche, but not when it is used to describe Ted. And that is, Ted is the salt of the earth. He is gracious. He is unpretentious. He is a person who defines genuine and authentic self. I know that in my work in ACPE, Ted has often been the strong salt of the earth when I am in my salty mode. He has dedicated much of his life's efforts to the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education, and I am thrilled that the Reverend Dr. Ted Hodge is the 2018 ACPE recipient of the Distinguished Service Award.
As an introvert, it's not easy to follow three extroverted women. But as Joe Clara said, I'm delighted my wife is here. She is a strong extroverted woman as well, so I'm used to it. Can I tell you how good it feels to be up here? To put this in context, some 30 years ago, I was chair of the Budget and Investment Committee. And I had to present a budget that included raising the dues of every member. And if the people had had rotten tomatoes, I know they would have thrown them at me because it was that contentious at that time. So to be able to stand here tonight and receive your affirmation and this Distinguished Service Award, I can't tell you how nice that feels, and I'm trying to just let it soak in. Some 20 years ago, I was at one of these meetings. I think it was 20. My timing is a little off. But I said to one of my colleagues, I said, you know, I just don't see as many of the old-timers as I used to. And he turned to me and he says, what do you mean? We are the old-timers. And so standing up here tonight to receive this award, I really am feeling more like an old timer. But in reality, I really don't. Because one of the highest values I think we as ACPE have is that we are lifetime learners. And as Joe Claire mentioned, we just got back from Cuba. We actually flew in last night. Tremendous, tremendous experience meeting the people there and learning more about them directly than what I hate to say our government says about Cuba. But I do want to say thank you. Thank you, Joe Claire, for making me look better than I probably am. But also I want to say especially thankful to 3 different groups. One, to Louisville, to my Baptist hospital where I worked for 40 years, for them allowing me to be as actively involved in ACPE as they did, to have a chance to go teach in Hong Kong. That's probably how I was able to stay at the hospital for all those years, because it gave me a chance to do something a little different in a different context, and whetted my appetite to do even more of that. But also to the Louisville cluster. I don't know if you all know, but at one time there were 4 centers, including a mental hospital, and there were 2 seminaries, and there were 7 CPE supervisors at those 2 seminaries, Presbyterian and Baptist Seminary. There were about 15 supervisors in Louisville. We would supervise over 200 students a year. And I want to say thank you to my colleagues, people like Wade Rowett, Mary Burks, Isaac Jaguna, and I'm sure there are others, Frank Wogon, who helped to get this nomination going, who's in Germany right now. But also to the supervisors I had. Even Franklin Duncan was a small group leader for my first pastoral care course. Hard to believe all the connections. And people like Wayne Oates, Edward Thornton, Andy Lester, Walter Jackson, you know, people who meant so much over the years in terms of my own formation. But I especially want to mention Clarence Barton. He was my very first supervisor. He is almost 90 years old. He and his wife, who's 92, they have modeled to me what it means to be a lifelong learner. They've traveled around the world. My wife and I get together with them every couple of months and have supper, and we come away so alive. By the way, I do need to say this about my wife. Because she's been such an active participant in especially the East Central region meetings, they made her an unofficial ACPE supervisor. But Clarence, we get together and discuss books that they're reading. He paints. He used to garden, but he is a model of what it means to be a lifelong learner, and a model for me as I hope in retirement to continue that process. That's a part of why I love and serve ACPE. I want to also thank what was the East Central region. When I first became a supervisor, someone from the nominating committee came to me and said, "Would you serve on the Budget Investment Committee?" Now, I'm an introvert, as I said. I don't know that I would have gone and just volunteered and said, you know, would you put me on that committee? And that started the process of me actually even standing here and being as involved as I have been. And I guess I'm trusting that with this new process that we have, that there will still be ways that people are invited to do things that might not necessarily volunteer, and that there'll be some kind of conduit that leads from those local places to being involved at the national level as well, because I can't tell you how rich it's been to know so many people from across the country, not just in my local area. And then finally, I want to just say thank you to the ACPE board and to all of you all for this recognition. It took me 4 tries to become a supervisor. And by the time I had worked so hard and written so many papers and presented so many students that I'd almost forgotten, why do I even want to be a supervisor and be in this organization? But I was I was recognized at the national conference at Estes Park, Colorado, at the YMCA of the Rockies. The only time I remember that we met at a place like that. Well, there was no distractions. I mean, we had to eat all our meals together there around tables that held 10 or 12 people. So I met more people than I'd ever met before in that organization. And it was still at that time primarily Christian organization, but we had communion. And for the first time I was served by 2 white men, a black man, and a white woman. That was different. The table, though, was beginning to be enlarged. And then there wasn't a whole lot to do except to go listen to the elk bugling. So we were invited to attend the board meeting if we would want. So I went to the board meeting, and there was a gay man who stood up and addressed the board and said that he didn't feel welcomed or respected, but his voice was heard, and a promise that they would try to do something about that. And all of a sudden I began to realize this is why I want to be a part of ACPE and why I want to be involved and continue to serve, and it's why I have continued to give in many different ways that I have. So thank you, ACPE, for your recognition of what was a total surprise for me. Thank you.